Wonderful. Thank you for speaking with me today. I'm really excited to talk to you about sugar. I guess we could start at the beginning of how you got brought onto the show.
I received a call for sugar from the director of our episodes, Adam Arkin. And Adam and I had worked together previously on The Americans. He was the directing producer of the first season and set the tone of that show and did a huge lift to establish The Americans for what it became, which was a very character-driven, exciting, and historically accurate in some places drama. And he had tried, we tried to work together a couple times since, various schedule issues, location where I could, wasn't able to travel at some point, and then I was able to travel, but the dates were wrong. Point being, he was persistent, like 7 years or 10 years persistent, actually 10. And then this came up, and it was a great opportunity. And of course, I liked the idea that we'd also be integrating our work with Fernando Moraes and Cesar Chalon, and they're heroes of mine. And it was interesting, the idea that they would do episodic television format. That's not usually their format. And then I was sent the scripts, and I was totally turned on by the scripts. So all of this came together, and it came right at the tail end of another shoot, and I went to Los Angeles. They were nice enough to bring me to Los Angeles, which is unusual for a cinematographer based in New York.
I mean, you've already mentioned, collaborating and being attracted to the series based off of, who else was shooting it. What was that collaboration process like? Did you work together to figure out, how your episodes were going to blend tonally? What was that like?
So Fernando and Cesar have a shorthand developed over decades. I mean, they've been working for close to 30 years together. And it involves a lot of rapid coverage, not often thinking traditionally at all about where the camera is respecting an eye line or how the scene is developed as a sort of continuous shot. Instead, it's multiple pieces that will become finessed in edit. And even lighting and somewhat technique, like what capture mechanism is less valued, and it's more about the amount of footage that can be handled with multiple cameras at once. So it becomes a real challenge for the editors, but of course that's what they want. They want that feeling. Cesar hadn't worked in Los Angeles much, if at all. He had to be brought into the union, and there were several parts to the equation that made it necessary for me to come on a bit earlier than my normal prep would be, because I helped Cesar with hiring crew and establishing a LUT, and also figuring out post workflow and things that he would have done totally himself in Brazil, but needed to be sort of managed a little in the Los Angeles environment. And in the end, it really helped our collaboration, Cesar and myself, that we were busy meeting crew. I brought along some people I had known for almost 20 years, as well as some people I got to meet through the producers, and they all turned out to be excellent. So Cesar felt very supported and very cared for in this environment, and free. And he started introducing the idea that he'd be using the iPhone a lot, like a lot of iPhones with attachments. He had a VR headset that he could be pointing the camera and seeing it on his headset, resulting in some rather hilarious photos. And he was bold about how it got used. It would be on the end of a stick and just pointed into the water and brought up out of the water and things like that. So it was liberating. It was like back to times when I was in college and experimenting with types of shots that were just, simple to achieve, but bold comparatively to narrative filmmaking traditionally. I liked very much talking to him about the image, and I believe that in our ability to communicate that way, we drove each other a little bit. He liked learning about different types of lighting units, how to light a stage. He was very unfamiliar with how to light a stage in a practical sense in Hollywood backlot, which I knew. But then again, he had great ways of thinking about camera placement and the sort of propulsion of the edit. So it became a combination. I think when one looks at the first 4 episodes of the show, you see one sort of technique going in one direction on an episode, and then it comes back around a little bit in our episodes, but it gets refined into something more like long oneers, or, you know, keeping track of multiple moving people. Sometimes we were using people's images on iPhones or on laptop screens or on the Polaroids that reveal the mystery of the dress, in combination with a screening of a 35 millimeter anamorphic print that becomes its own clue.
Yeah.
So I liked the integration of all these, and I liked the overall theme of a dark town with darker secrets. And that was fun in broad daylight. I mean, the classic color noir of Los Angeles.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'd love to ask about the LUT that you both worked on together to create. How did you come to the look that you wanted to have for this neo-noir LA?
Kind of experimentation, and then it got refined by our DIT during the shooting. It was called K-Lady, and then Kyle Hoekstra, our really great DIT, brilliant guy, sort of helped us find a sort of sweet spot in between all of the needs. Because, you know, it would be very easy to just let all the windows fully blow out, but you're in LA, so you want to see some things out windows. We knew we'd be traveling with Sugar in a car in broad daylight in LA. We didn't want too much saturation. We wanted that, you know, LA blue sky, but we didn't want it to be too candy color or too, you know, too normal, quote unquote. And it would be hard to describe it as anything more than just a kind of give and take, like, let's try this, let's try that, and then settled in on something that we all loved working with. We'd make some adjustments to stills, CDLs at the end of the day to help the dailies process. And then from dailies, the work got further color corrected and brought in some of the highlights in Cesar's episode, or went into, you know, establishing a little more contrast in some of my work in the episodes to get to a place that it integrated well. And in the end, I'm very proud of the overall arc visually. I think it's interesting. I think it's interesting when you take a risk, experiment a bit, and you get back something you weren't fully foreseeing at the beginning, but you're very happy with it.
Mm-hmm. Were you looking at, you know, any classic films, any photography of LA? Like, what was, did you have any visual inspirations that you were really going back to with this, or no?
Well, we talked about classic black and white noir, like In a Lonely Place or the Mike Hammer films, especially things with private detectives, which are legion and well known. And
Yeah.
then we talked about color noir, things like LA Confidential, to the point where we hired the villain from LA Confidential as a major player. And this was all, of course, done before I was there. The only casting I contributed to was getting Ben Mankiewicz to play Ben Mankiewicz, which I was very happy about, suggesting that he could do that. He'd spoken
Yeah.
at the ASC awards dinners, and I knew he was probably going to be just perfect in that
Right.
playing himself part, which was very meta and very, it folded in well with the themes of the show, being self-reflexive about the legacy of the private detective in Los Angeles and the missing young woman.
Mm-hmm.
And then, you know, The Long Goodbye, of course, came up, as it would do in almost any color private detective LA-based stories. I think the other one I brought forward, well, I was talking to them about The Constant Gardener, because I really like that movie. And I was like, what you guys did with color, you know, selective saturation in Constant Gardener is quite beautiful. I wonder if we could achieve something like that here. And that's film capture, so it's all very different.
Right.
But they were quite open to that as a reference, you know, probably modest to reference themselves. And I think I also brought up an old movie called The Deep End. This is a movie Gilles Nicken shot it, and for a pair of directors, and this is going back to like the year 2002 or three. And it was a color noir with the classic elements in it, you know, a mystery, a hidden reality, a woman trying to protect her son. And they used color and lighting very beautifully in a totally different environment. They were on Lake Tahoe.
Mm.
So I remember talking a bit about that. Talked a little bit about Philip Lorca de Corsia still photographs, which are LA based, and they take place in the sort of seedier sides. What you have to understand, like the story kind of follows two tracks. There's the high end with Jonathan Siegel, legendary producer, multimillionaire, establishment LA person. But there's a lower track too, a sort of seamier side to things. And our episodes kind of, you know, introduce the characters that live in the underground of it. And I liked that, even to the point where at the end of four, you're intercutting between Sugar in his very fancy hotel suite, the Hotel del Corazon, and he's looking at his evidence and his laptop and having his scotch, and you're cutting to the seamier side of town, the house out by the oil pumps, where the woman is making sure that the lock is still on the closet, what's in there. And, things are underlit. Things are like a little grungy and a little like peering into the shadows to see. And I felt that was, thematically part of the process of him assembling that mystery in these worlds. So.
Yeah, absolutely. You spoke a little bit about unconventional framing and also a way of getting coverage. Were you shooting two cameras at once, or was it okay?
Two up to seven.
Wow.
So if you think about it, you're always faced with a limited time to get work done. And there was this important plot point that once Sugar gets into the premiere, the film premiere or the retrospective, he then goes to the projection booth where he's treated to a visual of multiple security cameras, all simultaneously watching different parts of the movie theater interiors, including the auditorium and things like this. Well, we came up with this idea that we'd just plant cameras in strategic places for strategic shots, the stairwell, the spot against the wall where Amy, Ryan, and Dennis have their encounter, Bernie and Melody. And then we would also just photograph, oddball angles on the bar or at the front door. And that played on those screens simultaneously. The only way to do it was to essentially hide cameras. And then when we'd be doing the car, we'd have like, two cameras filming the actual quote unquote cinema camera shots in the car, but we'd also hide iPhones, things like that.
Yeah.
Or the Sony, I used something called the Sony RXO, and that factors in quite a bit. In fact, when you're looking at our social media delivery from Olivia, which becomes part of the clue of like who got to her, who was after her, because she's very worried about her safety. We shot a lot of those with this Sony RXO, which I thought delivered a slightly improved image from an iPhone, but could be then crafted into the iPhone shape and either used full screen without too much, diminution, or could be inserted into a phone screen.
Interesting. Okay. What for the cinema camera look, what were you shooting on?
Sony Venice. We worked out at Panavision Woodland Hills. We had a beautiful set of primes. I think it was Veritals, and then or Variels. I'm so sorry. And then we had a lot of zooms. Cesar and Fernando wanted to work more with zooms than what I was used to. Once I got into it, I realized, oh yeah, this is very flexible and nice. And there's actually zooms in my episodes, either in the car or in certain dialogue scenes. And we got into that rhythm as well, not really putting the camera on a fluid head very often, quite often, either box in a bag or on your knee or something like that. And moving the camera into a new setup even while the actors are performing. So we'd work out two camera coverage. And if I felt a shot had grown a little dead, I would, quietly off the side, move the camera to a new perspective and zoom to get us another piece of coverage so that that sort of jump cut aesthetic could be established and maintained. And it really helped around the middle of the episode. There's a long sit down talk with a woman named Ruby who has clues as to why Olivia may have disappeared and what's going on with the darker side of the Siegel family. And this is, people say like, well, how do you do this big action sequence? Trust me, I'm much more comfortable doing a big multi-camera action sequence than trying to keep 7 minutes of conversation going with seated actors in a room. There is where I'm like, okay, what are we going to do? How are we going to plot this out so that there's an ebb and flow and a rise and fall to the cinematography through a scene like that? And I already knew they wanted very much a jump cut aesthetic. So I think you see it on screen. We're panning, even short sighting during someone's conversation point. We're on hands and on nervous fidgets, and we're back and forth between people. Sometimes we even leave the person speaking so that we can observe the person watching them speak. And this, and we had a plant camera way up in a corner, a sort of very noir thing where you go up higher and frame wide.
Yeah.
And so that's a a known camera placement technique from old noir films. So we would emulate that, and maybe it only appears once in the sequence, but it sort of establishes mood and shot structure. So in any case, it was adventuresome and fun, and equally interesting to dwell in the actual locations of Los Angeles, near Hollywood Boulevard, out in the sort of near the Culver City hills where there are working oil wells still,
Yeah.
uh, on the roads outside of town. I mean, within LA County, we filmed the supposed drive to Arizona, and it's all just within LA County. Put
Wow.
us in there, yeah.
Well, I mean, first of all, it's like it's so interesting hearing about, and it totally makes sense to create this jump cutty aesthetic. That there's a lot of creativity in moving during a take and in a scene, and I feel like that shows. It just kind of exemplifies how much you have to have a very tight grasp on the ebb and flow of the scene and the story and where it needs to be at a certain moment to be able to do that so effectively. But it
Well,
sorry,
no,
what?
it starts on the page. It
Yeah.
starts with the writing, and from the writing you glean the intention and also the mood and also the specifics that have to be told within that part of the story. And then you look at the script in a grander way, and you realize that it's structural. You have a woman identifying herself on a video uh, post right at the beginning. She's our missing young woman,
Yeah.
and she starts to identify the darker things that are coming after her. By later in the episode, you're watching dark revelations about one of the lead characters, Davy Siegel, delivered on phones to an audience who's just watched a classic film. So medium is the message. We're sort of tying all that together. Then you're watching the print of the dead wife of Jonathan Siegel, and then you're seeing mysterious Polaroids held right next to images of that film, and it becomes very meta. I mean, not to get too heady about it, because you're trying to tell a clear story. It's
Mhm.
just you're using what's on the page to help you identify the best way to tell it, and
Yeah.
that is always the goal. It's most successful when people have the open mind that they had on this show, and when they want something to step outside normal boundaries, to color outside the line a bit.
Yeah. I mean, I'd love to, talking about all of these different cameras and techniques coming into it. I'd love to talk about your creation of the anamorphic film and what that process was like.
Mm. I really must say our creation, because of all the things we got to do, and we got to do a number of things between drone shots and underwater photography and
Yeah.
everything in the first couple episodes I was doing with Adam, the first block. Uh, the people involved in the actual production of our show became the most excited about the idea that we were going to shoot even a small segment of a classic color anamorphic print. And this came about for a couple of reasons. One was it's written in the script. Two was going to the Warner Theater, a classic Warner Theater down in Long Beach. Even in the first minute of walking inside, I'm like, this is a functional, real theater with a real projectionist and real gear ready to screen real films. That's what we should do. And I talked to Adam about it, and he goes, if you want to push this forward, I'm game. I'd much rather my actors and my scene involve images on the screen they can work with
Mhm.
than a gray screen or a green screen, which will cast green light over everything. I found the insistence that this had to be a visual effects thing to be backwards from what the opportunity was.
Yeah.
And then the truth is, you're told, oh, no one cuts negative, you're not going to have time to turn around the print. I'm like, no, my experience from since 1990 of film is that it actually goes very quickly. And if you're just going to cut it A roll only, not a B roll, but just an A roll with cement splices at the correct perf mark, you're going to be able to turn around a print within a couple days. And that's what happened. We shot the film one night on the Paramount backlot. We got in, I think it was E-series anamorphics. Yes, I think it was E-series anamorphics and a platinum camera from Panavision. Very inexpensive to switch out for the night. Now we're not on digital capture, we're on film capture, but everything else works. I mean, your wireless focuses and your fluid heads and your dolly are all the same.
Right.
And then we came up with this idea that it could be like a Douglas Sirk vibe, that it could have intense color justified by the sort of story we were telling, and that she's at the backstage door of a nightclub and she's dressed to go on stage, and her wannabe boyfriend is this, beautifully groomed, suave looking man in a dinner jacket, and that the lighting would be the higher key lighting that from older films. We wouldn't light to the bare minimum stop. We'd light to like a 4.5, even at night. And I remember lighting to those stops back in the day.
Yeah.
And that we'd involve rain. We'd involve a rain effect, and we'd, wet down the entire street and park these 40s vehicles. So just a ton of fun.
Yeah.
And people on the set, my gaffer, wonderful Tracy, my focus puller, Matt Stenerson, and the people working with him, everyone really went for it. Kenny, our operator, and there was just Dave, the grip. There was just a great bonhomie, like a camaraderie around the idea of like, isn't this cool? And we all remember how this used to work. And we had, I think, 3,000 feet of film, and we knew that's it. You're going to get what you get out of these magazines. And that's another psychological like reality that we don't acknowledge as much anymore, that there is a limit to the material. Choose wisely, be smart, rehearse the take, rehearse the focus so that it's going to be right away. And paid off. I thought it looked really nice. The next step was to convince people that the digital capture at the theater would not have sync problems with the projector. And I found myself amazed that I had to keep explaining the projector is always in sync. It runs off the mains of the power grid. So unless Long Beach suddenly has this enormous, change in the hertz being delivered to everyone's home, you're going to have a sync projector, and it's not one image each cycle of the shutter, it's two. So we're going to be fine. And sure enough, we were. And then the question was, is it going to be bright enough? So that got me back into working with the projectionist, making sure the bulb was the right color temperature, making sure I could light the house. You notice there is some warmer, softer light hitting the backs of heads and things. And then sometimes we play the projector reflection on people's faces. But I wanted to make sure that I got to the right f-stops to make the whole thing work and make the image on screen look as clear and crisp as possible. There is no VFX work involved in when you see the image in the frame. It's the image that was projected.
That's really impressive.
Yeah.
It's really cool to see it done practically, because it is kind of a different feel than just having a blank screen, for sure. I mean, that's, I think, absolutely the ideal for the talent to be able to be acting with that actually there.
It allowed us to put two cameras on two different frames relatively quickly, so one on Colin, one on Jonathan, then one on Bernie and his wife, then one down the line on Anita Gunn and all this, and Anna Gunn, sorry. And also we did something that, like, again, so simple. I said, look, you'll print the A roll, but then the print reel will have about 10 seconds black, and it'll just print again. They don't worry, Photochem can do this. And that gave us 5 or 6 repetitions so that you didn't have to worry about like, oh, we missed that. We have to rewind the print, and the print, it might get jammed up rewinding. I was like, no, you'll just get to the end of that reel. You'll rewind it quickly and you'll start again, and you've got 5 or 6 repetitions. So it turned out, as you said, practically it was very, very effective and quick to work with.
You have everything from 35 millimeter film to, ostensibly iPhone footage in this, which I think is really, really interesting, being able to kind of meld the old and the new, which is kind of also the show in general. Like, it has a very long history of this type of plot and, making it this modern, fresh thing. One other scenario, which, is constant throughout, that I wanted to ask you about is kind of the driving, because that seems
LA is a driving town.
Yeah.
LA is one serious
especially-
driving town.
Yeah, and especially driving during, the day, where it's like, oh my goodness, you really can't have that much control over lighting. And you're trying to keep things within a certain realm. So what was that, can you speak more about the process of shooting cars during the day in LA?
Well, I'd like to say that it's the same process as in the past, but digital can be unforgiving when it comes to overexposure. It's not as smooth on faces, and part of the K-Lady LUT and then adjustments thereafter was to roll off the highlight in a very filmic way and not have the overexposure on faces be unkind to the actors or actresses. Planning the route was always important.
Mhm.
We did use a low loader that allowed us to place cameras on the side of the vehicle, so we weren't just rigged to the car. In fact, we learned early on you don't rig to a Corvette from the 1960s. They're made of plexiglass
Oh,
or some they're a fiber material. They're not metal.
yeah.
So unlike in other scenarios where I might suggest let's just do a hood mount and a side mount, we were working with loaders to avoid damaging the Corvette.
Uh-huh.
Corvette had its problems, actually. Older cars always do.
Yeah.
And the aside from the route, which then determines what your sun's going to be like, because as you say, you're in and out of shade and sun, and sometimes into cloud and sun. I was riding the iris wheels quite, what's the word? Very attentive to exposure.
Yeah.
The other thing is, you do get something from it as much as there's these issues to get those shots done. And I actually like the ones at night too, where we're just me sitting in the passenger seat, strapped in and safe, but filming the beautiful lights of Los Angeles at night and that sort of noir aesthetic as the investigator drives through the city, something's on his mind. It all played out rather beautifully at times. Some of the lighting effects were well beyond what I could have planned in if I'd been doing them on a volume or process stage. So in any case, the shots are normal shots, but just in that sort of way where you're trying to focus on context. So you're saying like, okay, now he's in Los Feliz, now he's downtown, now he's driving out, like people are driving out to Malibu. There was a shot where she arrives at the Malibu house of Bernie at the end of episode 3. And actually, that house is mere minutes from the Paramount lot. It's in this little area around Melrose, and luckily some mist came in that night, so it kind of sold. Like you felt like, oh my gosh, we're at the beach.
Yeah.
And I always say context is character. So you can have dialogue and actors, and they can be excellent, but the context that you see people in matters, and it helps set the audience up for where the story, where the mood, where the storytelling is at in that moment. And I think some of the greatest shots are where you're following someone from behind and you see the context they're entering, and that fills your head with what they're going through. You start to ask, what are they thinking? Or you see a character silent in a space and you realize, oh, okay, now we're into this new part of the story. We're going to be introduced to this. This kind of happened in episode 7 when both Melanie and Sugar go to a home where they're going to find a dead body, and they have to sneak in the back, and it's all very like special little shots and references to empty spaces and was there a child here, and it's very depressing. And then you find the dead body, and I was proud of us keeping that forward momentum intact in a way that said, look at this context, this is not the Siegel mansion anymore.
Uh-huh. Right. Well, wonderful. I mean, I'm trying to, because I wanted to definitely talk about that projection scene. I wanted to talk in general about the creation of this neo-noir. Are there any other scenes or aspects of the episodes you shot that for you really stand out as a particular challenge that you love that you'd like to talk us through?
Well, it can be tough, but for various reasons. The show wanted to have stage sets. We were working on the Paramount lot, and I think part of the way the production was set up, and beautifully produced, really great producers, Matt and Chip. Part of the way the show was set up is you had to do some material on stage sets. And what could be done on sets should, and so we built several things. A really terrific production designer, Tom Foden, like he's worked with Ridley Scott. He's really, I loved him. And he created the interior of Ruby's house, a house that we did the exteriors of in Altadena. And he also created the interior and a bit of the exterior of Sugar's bungalow, the quote unquote Hotel del Corazon, which is actually a private large place in Altadena also. They're not far from each other, Ruby's house and that. And there were going to be scenes where we had to cross the threshold and be inside the set, and at the same time establish outside the walk up and everything up to that threshold. But nothing really could connect. You cross the threshold, you're not going to see what you see. And on the outside with Ruby's set, we had the challenge that there is a porch with some greens around it, and they wanted to shoot dialogue there, but it had to directly match to the thing that we would shoot at Altadena at night, which showed properly the opposite side of the street and some of the yards around. These things worry a camera person because you just don't want there to be this unconscious moment where the audience says, wait a second, and it's because you've crossed over from a real location and your lighting of the real location to the stage threshold, stage porch. We did it. I dare you to figure out which shots were done on location versus at the stage. I had great collaboration with Green's production design, the lighting team. Again, Tracy Estes, fantastic gaffer. It's impossible to know which of those dialogue pieces took place. And within the sequence, because you've got a guy coming out the door of the stage house, and then you've turned around onto Sugar, and he's going to go to his car. You just don't know. You never even think about it. So I was very happy with that, the way that challenge played out. We also had some challenges, on beginning of episode 3, Sugar wakes up in a chair. He's been kicked out of his own bed because the dog doesn't sleep well. And we have open windows to a patio. And, very California, like you can have the windows open at night because the air is nice and it's nice when the light comes up in the morning. Well, that's a stage set. And I was extremely happy with the realization of that image. And we did a bunch of jump cutty small bits. And of course, you can get away with more on a tight shot. But we also did a wide shot that included the ceiling and the reflection of some water, from outside up in the ceiling. And I was just so, proud of everyone's work, effects and everyone. The reflection sold, the stage set sold, the sky beyond sold, and it's all, it's all a creation.
I would have definitely thought that some of that was absolutely filmed on location, not on a set. So that's kudos to you. That's great. Kudos to your whole team. It sounds, like there was
it is a
great
team effort.
collaboration. Yeah. So that's wonderful.
And
Okay.
look, I will say that the focus pullers had a tough job on this because if we're going to swing the camera about during a scene or move physically, like me moving my box and my knee to get a closer shot up, the focus pullers have to be totally on point with their work, but also their anticipation of like, where might Richard go here, and their knowledge of the lenses. Because I think that I've talked to Mr. Stenerson about this, and he's a veteran. Once you're on a particular focal length, once you kind of know where the framings are, what we call 2 buttons or 1 button, or you get into, cutting the headroom but keeping the chin, or you get all the way into beyond the chin and the headroom. Matt is an experienced focus puller with a great resume, did Maestro among other things. And he just knows if you're gonna get into that, I'm at 5'7", or maybe I'm at 3'8". But I'll watch it because it's part of the dance and part of the stylistic component that we all answer to. And so I really appreciated his work. Kenny, our Steadicam operator, was equally liberated in his thinking about how to capture frames that were going to continue to work within our aesthetic and not just get a traditional frame. And I was very grateful to them all.
That's great.